What does it actually mean to be perfect? Not just really good, not just flawless in some areas, but perfect in the absolute sense, like in intention, understanding, and creation. Now, here's the question I want you to think about. Can a perfect being create something imperfect? This may sound theological, but it's not, at least not entirely. This is purely a thought experiment about logic, intention, consistency, and what you describe as perfection. And depending on your answer, you might end up redefining the very meaning of perfection. When this question is asked, most people instinctively say, yes, a perfect being can create imperfection, if that was the intention. And the reasoning goes something like this. A perfect being has total freedom, agency, and potency, so it can create anything, including things that are limited, flawed, or imperfect. Some even argue that imperfection might be intentional as part of a larger design. This idea is famously associated with thinkers like Saint Thomas Aquinas. In the Summa Theologiae, he defines perfection by saying, "A thing is perfect to the extent that it is actual, for that which is perfect lacks nothing." In simpler terms, something is perfect when nothing is missing for what it's supposed to be. For example, imagine a car being built. While it's still missing parts, it's not perfect yet because it's incomplete. But once it's fully built and functioning as a car should, then it is perfect because now nothing is missing for what makes it a car. So from his perspective, a perfect being can create things that are limited, not because they are flawed, but because they're complete relative to what they are. But there's a problem with this idea, and it's not immediately obvious.
Let me break it down for you, Mark.
If a being is truly perfect, then its knowledge must be perfect, its intentions must be perfect, and thus its actions and subsequent creations, if applicable, must also be perfect. So when he creates something, that creation should perfectly reflect all three. Now here's the issue. If the result is imperfect in any way, then one of two things must be true. Either the imperfection was intentional, which means the intention itself contains imperfection, or the imperfection was not intentional, meaning the being failed to fully carry out its intention. And both of these are problems because either way you slice it, something isn't perfect. And to demonstrate this point, look at the following analogy. A perfect artist might sketch something rough on purpose, which would then help them create the final perfect drawing. But this doesn't work, because the only reason artists sketch is precisely because they are not perfect. They need to draft, they need to revision the ideas, and they need to test them out. A truly perfect artist wouldn't need any of that. Why would they? There's no need to draft or revise or even test out how it would turn out. If they imagine it and then draw it, it would come out perfectly the first time due to the perfection. So now, the artist is stuck with two options. Either the sketches are intentionally imperfect, which only makes sense if the artist isn't actually perfect, or the artist can't fully carry out what they envisioned. So here's my core argument. Perfection requires a total alignment between knowledge, intention, and result. If a perfect being intends X, then the result must be X, perfectly. If the result is anything less or anything else, then one of three things happened. Either 1, its knowledge is flawed or limited, 2, it intended something that was flawed, or 3, it failed in its execution. And any of those means it's not perfect. Now, you might say, what if the imperfection was the goal? What if it was meant to be that way? That is precisely the point I'm arguing against. And to demonstrate that, here's my argument laid out in full. And it's gonna get dense, so lock in. A perfect being is one whose understanding, intention, and actions are all perfect. A perfect act is one that contains no defects in either intention or result. An imperfect thing is one that contains a defect, whether in its design or in its execution. Therefore, a perfect being can only produce things that contain no defects. Suppose a perfect being produces something imperfect. Then the result contains a defect, either because the defect was intended or unintended. If intended, then the intention contains a defect. If unintended, then the execution contains a defect. But a perfect being cannot have a defective intention or execution. which are premises 1 and 2. Therefore, the result both contains a defect and contains no defect. This is a contradiction. Ergo, a perfect being cannot produce something imperfect. In less fancy terms, if you say a perfect being intentionally creates imperfection, then you're also saying a perfect act contains a defect, which is logically inconsistent, because imperfection by definition is a lack, a deficiency, or a mismatch, and a perfect act cannot contain deficiency. Now, with all that being said, there's really only one way out of this. You have to redefine imperfection. You have to say what we call imperfect isn't actually imperfect. It's just limited, finite, or different. In other words, nothing is truly flawed. Everything is exactly as it should be, as Aquinas defines. But if you take that route, then you're no longer defending perfect beings creating imperfection. You're denying the very existence of imperfection. And this is where the real tension lies. Not in what a perfect being can do, but in what perfection even allows it to do. So now we're left with a dilemma. Either imperfection doesn't really exist, meaning everything is perfect in its own way, either by design or intention, which leads to a contradiction, or imperfection is real and a truly perfect being cannot be its source. There's no comfortable middle ground. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not to question creation, but rather to question what we mean when we say something is perfect. Because once you define perfection strictly, it starts to limit what a perfect being can even do. So, I'll leave you with this. If perfection means complete coherence, then can it ever produce a contradiction? Thank you very much for watching. If you found this interesting, please drop a like and subscribe for more thought experiments like this. And let me know in the comments, do you think a perfect being can create imperfection, or is that idea fundamentally inconsistent? Let me know what y'all think. Peace out.